Hey, everybody. Give me just a second here to share my screen. So I am going to give you a very brief mini lecture for the first 4 chapters of this textbook. Now, this class, as I have shared, sorry, hold on one second. My PowerPoint went on my other screen. Let me drag it. There we go. Okay, so as I have shared with you, this class is big. This class has a lot of information. So I did just want to kind of go in and pull out some highlights from each of the chapters. I will try to do this every module. But it is also why I give you other YouTube videos as well. If I lectured on these chapters, and I lectured the way that I would lecture in class, we would probably have 15 hours of lecture video. So I don't want to do that. Obviously, you'll never watch all that anyway, but I just want to kind of go in and give you kind of an overview of each chapter as you go. Some modules I'll give you more than I do in other ones, but now please don't panic. I know that this chapter 1 has 84 slides. I promise you, I did not write this. This is from the textbook people. I know that's a little overwhelming, which is kind of why I'm going to jump in here and just kind of explain what you have. The chapter is set up this way. Chapter 1 is set up this way. It talks about what the lifespan perspective is. And I believe it takes like 5 slides to tell you the lifespan perspective is looking at development from birth to death, actually from conception to death. There you go. That's what lifespan perspective is. And your text, your notes are good, but I think there's almost too much on here to really kind of help you understand. If I was a student, I wouldn't read all that. I would think that was totally overwhelming. There's some things in here about life expectancy and just that, people are, the upper boundary is 121 years. And you can read about life expectancy over over time and, where we're at. When you look at contextual influences, we look at things like normative and non-normative. Normative things are things that happen to most people: puberty, menopause, starting school, etc. Non-normative are things that only occur for a few people: early pregnancy, losing a parent as a child, winning the lottery. Those are non-normative things. They don't happen to most people. Your chapter 1 goes through so much. Talking about ethnicity is not just race, but it's also based on cultural heritage, things like socioeconomic status, which takes into account people's economic income, their occupation, their educational level, etc. When we look at some contemporary ideas for lifespan development, we look at things from the individual, from the family, and from outside of the family. Now, one of the things that is important, looking at the nature of development, if you pay attention to your textbook setup, you will see that we will talk about the physical or the biological, the cognitive, and the socio-emotional process at each age group. So that's what we're talking about with the nature of development. It's physical or biological, cognitive, and social emotional. Those all stand alone, and they all cross over. And there's a point where all 3 mesh together. Cognitive will mesh with social. I mean, there is definitely crossover in those areas of development. So biological, of course, is the physical. The cognitive is how you think about things. Now, don't accidentally put cognitive and biological. Cognitive talks about how you process things in your brain. Biological is the physical growth of things. And then the social emotional, of course, is your social or emotional development. And we're going to look at all of these through these periods of development. So we're going to look at the prenatal period, infancy, early childhood, middle childhood, teenagers or adolescents, early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. The physical, cognitive, and social emotional processes at all of those age groups, okay? So there's some information on periods of development. and some information on just the significance of age and, you know, how people age, some developmental issues like stability. We'll talk about stability later. Continuity and discontinuity. Is it a continuous kind of development that develops over time, or is it discontinuous, which is stages? Most of your theorists this semester, Piaget, Erikson, Bowlby, etc., are all going to be discontinuous theorists. They're all going to look at development in stages, but you do get Bronfenbrenner and Vygotsky and some others that look at it as continuous development. Now, don't try and remember all of these theorists and all their stages at this point. Have a general idea, but don't make yourself crazy trying to remember all this first chapter, because I promise you, you're going to get them all throughout the semester. Your theories of development, of course, look at development based on scientific method. They all had a theory, they all had a hypothesis. And so all of these areas, or these kind of categories of thought, all got to these conclusions using scientific method. So there's one umbrella of theories called the psychoanalytic. Anytime you hear the word psycho, you need to think of Freud, because Freud was our psychosocial sort of theorist, who, I'm sorry, I jumped a slide. So Freud, of course, is the father of all of that. Freud's theory of development talked about the oral stage, anal stage, phallic stage, latency stage, and genital stage. Freud's theory, really, we will continue to put it in lecture. However, this idea of Freud's theory of development is quite honestly becoming more and more and more criticized and more discarded, because we know that at the, in infancy, it's so much more than infant's pleasure center around the mouth. And we know that at the anal stage, 1.5 to 3, it's so much more than just toilet training. Much of Freud has been discarded by people, but we still will talk about him because, he's Freud. Erikson really took Freud's ideas and expanded on them. Erikson, in my opinion, is one of the more complete theories, because he talks about 8 areas of development, all of which we will talk about this semester. This theory is one that all of you will include in your paper, regardless of the age that you choose. Erikson is always the theorist that gives you a crisis that must be resolved. So you either are going to learn trust, or you're going to learn mistrust. You're going to learn to be autonomous, or you're going to learn shame and doubt. You're going to learn initiative or guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus identity or role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and then ego integrity versus despair. Okay, so Erikson is always the guy that talks about the verses, that you can go one way or another. Piaget is always our cognitive theorist. Piaget has 4 stages of development, with the sensory motor stage having 6 substages. Again, we will talk about Piaget up through formal operations, up through the end of really adolescence. Okay. Vygotsky, we'll talk more about Vygotsky later. He talks about how you learn from people by interacting with them. Information processing, not my favorite. It's a very sort of computer-like theory, but there are some good things to it. Behavioral theorist, Skinner, I like Skinner a lot. We talk about things with positive and negative punishment and reinforcement. We talk also about Bandura and how people model behavior. We talk about ethology, having critical or sensitive periods of development. John Bowlby was one of those theorists, although I kind of think he needs to be back in with the psychoanalytic. Ethology, which really uses this idea of evolution. Ecological, which is Bronfenbrenner, that talks about the person and the things that are in their microsystem, the family, the religious group, etc. And then those things interact in the mesosystem that affect the individual. The information out here in the exosystem, with neighbors and friends of family, and then finally the macro system and chrono system, all of these things that affect people's development. Okay, so again, I'm going through these very quickly, just to have a general idea, because we will go through all of these all semester long. The end of chapter 1 really looks at just your basic research design, your basic ideas of how we collect data, you know, that sort of stuff. So that's what's in chapter 1. Again, I told you this was going to be quick. So chapter 2 really looks at the biological beginnings. And in this chapter, it's really going to look at evolution. But the big issues with this is the idea of, you know, how we evolved, but really about natural selection, adaptive behavior, you know, how do genes continue to interact with the environment, ideas of evolutionary psychology, you know, looking at that. If your genes interact with the environment, do they stay, do they go? And then really looking at some issues with genetics. And then we get into ideas of the gene. And now those of you that love genetics or science people, this isn't a genetics class. So this is very, very basic. And we look at things because we're looking at things from the prenatal standpoint on. You know, we need to remember that, you know, everybody is made up of genes, chromosomes. So we have a cell that houses a chromosome, that houses, you know, your DNA, that houses your genes. And the way that you can really remember that is inside each cell, there's a nucleus, and in each nucleus, you have 23 chromosomes. The chromosomes house your DNA. Your DNA is like it's like a ladder. If you took it and spiraled it, that's your DNA. And if you think about that ladder, where you would step on that ladder is the genes. Okay. And each thing has its own job. And as I said, every cell has 23 chromosomes. So the idea is when we are looking at fertilization of an egg, you have an egg and a sperm, both that have cells that have 23 chromosomes. And the idea is that egg is going to find a sperm, and that sperm is going to fertilize that egg. And each cell from the sperm carrying 23 chromosomes is going to find the mate cell in the egg also carrying 23 chromosomes, and they are going to get together. So the cells for, you know, or the when you're looking at those chromosomes coming together, they zip up. So, you know, where your eyesight is in a cell in a sperm finds the cell and in the egg, and they group together and they mesh together, so they become this product of conception, for lack of a better word. And all of the genes find each other. Okay, the hair and the eyes and all of that, and how your body creates and what where all those cells go. It's an amazing process. It's this idea of mitosis, where the cells will reproduce into itself and copy itself. And then they will divide and they will copy and they will divide and they will copy. And that's how we get a baby. The meiosis is is where the cell division is forming eggs or sperm. So it usually involves the end part of things, and it involves deciding what the future baby will be biologically assigned as a male, female, as a boy or a girl, with what parts. Here's your genes under a microscope, and yes, they do look this way. You know, it is what they look like under a microscope. So your chromosomes will all line up. You know, you end up with 23 pair from your mom, 23 pair from your father, for a total of 46 or 23 pair. 23 from mom, 23 from dad, which is 46, or 23 pair. So when we want to know if a baby is biologically assigned a boy or a girl, you look at the last pair, the 23rd pair. Okay. If you have this top box, the A box, the X, it has an X and a Y, we know that this is a boy because sperm will carry either an X or a Y as their 23rd chromosome. Females or girls, eggs always carry just X. So every egg carries an X for the 23rd pair. So the biological sex of the child is determined by the male sperm. Okay, so this is how, if people want to specifically try for a boy or a girl and they are doing things in a doctor's lab, they will find the sperm that is carrying the Y or the X, depending on what they want, and that's what they will fuse with the egg. So genotype, what is your genetic makeup? Phenotype, what do we see? If you have a gene for brown hair and we see it, it's a genotype and it's also a phenotype. You can read a lot about chromosomal abnormalities and all kinds of things that happen. The majority of these chromosomal abnormalities probably happen before mom even knows she's pregnant. And it can happen anytime in this sort of conception process. So you can read about adoption, and different things in the environment that can be a problem for pregnancies and other things. Oops, sorry, wrong thing. Okay, so then when you get to chapter 3, okay, so chapter 3, we're looking at the prenatal development and birth. I did not link to a birth video. That's up to you if you want to watch something like that or not. Please remember that everybody's delivery is different. Couple of things to keep straight here. When we are talking about the course of prenatal development prenatally, we are talking about 3 periods: the germinal period, which is prenatal development that occurs in the first 2 weeks after conception. It's the development of that, what soon will be a baby, 2 weeks after conception in the germinal period. Okay. And then you have the embryonic period, which is 2 to 8 weeks after conception. And when we're talking about prenatal development, we're talking about the development of the cells inside that have started to grow because the egg and the sperm have gotten together. Okay, so it's the germinal period, then the embryonic period, and then the fetal period. When I get down here, I think it was actually on this slide. And then the fetal period. The fetal period goes from about 8 weeks till birth. Okay, these are different than the trimesters of pregnancy. The course of prenatal development is just looking at the basic process of the development of those cells. Okay, so germinal, embryonic, and then fetal. When we're talking about trimesters of prenatal development, we are talking about then the pregnancy itself. The pregnancy is divided up into trimesters: the first, the second, and the third. And I'm looking for my picture and I don't see it. Okay, so conception to 4 weeks, and then 4 to 8 weeks, and then 5 to 8 weeks. Sorry. I used to have a nice little slide here and I don't know where it went. Had a nice little map slide. I don't know where that went. All right, so the first trimester, conception to 4 weeks, and then 5 weeks to 8 weeks. And then 8 through 12-ish. Actually, 8 through 16. And then, so 15. And then second trimester goes 16 weeks on, okay, up to 27 weeks. At 28 weeks, then it becomes the third trimester. Okay, the third trimester, any baby that's born before the third trimester, somewhere 27 weeks or before, is not usually compatible with life. Now, they have had babies certainly that have been born at 25, 26 weeks. They are very, very small. You're able to hold them in the palm of your hand, their head to their butt in the palm of your hand. They are many babies that have weighed less than a pound. That is certainly not ideal. it happens, but the chances of survival at before 27 weeks is not very good. 28 weeks and on is certainly much better. You actually are pregnant. Please don't think about pregnancy in the terms of months, because when you get to your 9th month, you're going to find out that you still have 4 weeks left. You need to go for 40 weeks. Somewhere between 38 and 40 weeks is considered full term. 40 weeks, if you want to think about it in the terms of months, is 10 months. So you are pregnant. And so from the time of conception to birth is approximately 38 to 40 weeks. It can be 38, it can be 42. 42 is really depressing when that happens, because you've just been pregnant for so long, you're over it by then. Okay, so again, just some more about prenatal development. This is the slide on teratogens. Teratogens are things in the environment that are bad for baby. It doesn't necessarily have to be drugs and alcohol. It can be things in the environment, like cough medicine. It can be things like, bean sprouts, alfalfa sprouts that can carry E. coli. It can be things like eating deli meat from the deli that you have cut because they didn't clean the meat slicer. So now you've got E. coli. It can be things like cat litter that also pass bad diseases through the through dirty cat litter. Things in the environment, pollutants. You really should not, you shouldn't paint a room because of those sort of environmental concerns. And then just some other things in here about maternal diseases, rubella, syphilis, HIV, diabetes, things that can be a major concern during pregnancy. And then your last part of this section talks about the birth process. There are 3 stages to the birth. The first stage, where you get uterine contractions about 15 to 20 minutes apart, that lasts for up to a minute. This stage is the longest at 6 to 12 hours, maybe. Might be shorter, might be longer. The second stage is where baby's head moves through the cervix. And this can take 45 minutes to an hour, depending. And once baby is born, then the third stage is the afterbirth. That's when you have to deliver the placenta and the umbilical cord and all the other things that were in there. So if you look at this, you might think that you're in labor for about, 13 hours. No, maybe if you're lucky. Both of my children were about 24 hours. That's so happy. Both of my children like to keep me up all night. One was delivered right before midnight. One was delivered at 6 a.m. Both of them were very different birth processes, very different pregnancies. So it is important to keep in mind that, yes, you're reading this stuff, but everybody's experience is different. The length is different, all of it. This is birth, having a child is called being in labor because it is work. It is hard. It is tiring. There are a lot of things going on with your body. But it is also a very personal thing. Some people will decide to, go through natural childbirth where, you don't have really any medication. You don't really use anything. You just try to reduce your own fear through relaxation. I can tell you that I did this with my second child, and it was the easier of the 2 labors. And if I had to do it a third time, I would do natural again. I won't have a third child, but if I was to do that, I would do a natural childbirth the second time. And I was somewhere between natural and prepared. I used some Lamaze techniques, but most of it I just did on my own. My first I chose to use pain medication, and he was the harder labor, but he was the harder pregnancy. He was the longer labor. There was a whole lot of other things with him. At the time, that was the right decision. He was a ginormous child. My daughter was a whole 1.5 pounds lighter. So, they're very different. Very different children, very different labor experiences. And my experience is not going to be what your experience is. So, And then just a couple other things about the newborn. They will assess the newborn at 1 minute and 5 minute using the Apgar scale to test these things. That just kind of tells the pediatrician how the baby was at birth. And the nurse will chart on a chart and get a score. Usually a good score at 1 minute is right around 7. A score of 0 means we had to resuscitate. So those are just some basic things that happen. Certainly we can have a preterm baby, which again, they are very, very small. And that comes with a whole other world of problems. The postpartum, period, you just went through a baby being in your body for 38 to 40 weeks. You had all kinds of hormones and all kinds of vitamins and all kinds of things going on. You grew a child in there. Your body's going to take time to recover. It has to. And your physical adjustments are going to be different as well. I had postpartum depression bad with my first one. I didn't have any postpartum depression with my second one. I don't know why. But again, it is a recovery period and every woman's recovery is different. So that's that chapter. And then chapter 4 really is just looking at the newborn, and you have videos to go along with the newborn about motor development and sensory perception. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. A couple of important things here: the cephalocaudal pattern of growth, which is growth from the top of the head down. So this is why initially children up through age 2 look like they have giant heads, because they do. Heads grow first, and then proximal distal from the chest out. So then growth will happen in their extremities. So this is why young children look all like top heavy and lopsided, because they are. The growth will happen in the head first, but eventually, you grow into your head. Quite honestly, when you are 2, your head is not going to get much bigger. Your body just changes. So you kind of grow into your head. But if you measure your head doesn't change much in size. Your brain is 75% of adult size very early on. So you can just read about height and weight and physical growth. Usually the physical chapters are easier. There's a lot of stuff in here about the brain and just neurons and how they work. Babies will sleep, 18 to 24 hours. That'll never happen all at once. Some things on SIDS and nutrition. Breast milk is always best, but formulas are there. Breastfeeding has to be a personal choice. So, you can read through the motor development stuff. Again, I gave you some videos on video assignments to kind of go over some of the physical stuff for you. I know that was a fast lecture. It's going to be, because these chapters are very long. There's lots of information in these chapters, and I can't do 15 hours of, I could, but you would never watch 15 hours of video. So I will try to pop on and give you some of these just general overviews. I may not go through every chapter every time. I might just hit some of the highlights of each chapter, but I will try to give you at least something for every module. So that is this first one. So if you have any questions, let me know. If there's questions on the notes, certainly just shoot me an email. We can try to clarify it for you. Otherwise, you guys have a great day. Thanks.